Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
John, we begin with a look this morning at today's shortened trading session. The S&P is on course for its strongest month since February, part of an advance of 26% in 2024. But uncertainty remains. Wednesday's economic data caused investors to recalibrate their rate cut bets, and looming tariffs, or threatened tariffs at least, from the incoming Trump administration is weighing on specific sectors. As you mentioned, Treasury yields fell. The dollar is headed for its biggest weekly loss in 3 months. New York University Professor Emeritus Nouriel Roubini warns tariffs could have a broader effect on markets.
Some of the economic policies of Trump may lead to higher economic growth, being pro-business, keeping tax rates low, deregulating the economy. But unfortunately, many of the other policies are going to have an implication of higher inflation and lower economic growth. The first thing he has already announced is going to be tariff against Mexico, Canada, and China. And that's only the beginning.
NYU Professor Emeritus Nouriel Roubini expects traditional haven trades like the popular 60-40 portfolio will underperform in an inflationary environment.
Well, the uncertainty of Trump's economic policies, Nathan, is causing some movement in currencies. The peso gained following a call between President-elect Trump and Mexico's president this week. Trump posted on social media after the call saying it was productive and that she agreed to stop migration through Mexico. She responded saying that Mexico is not necessarily closing its borders. Bloomberg spoke with DHL Group CEO Tobias Meyer about how businesses are managing it, saying he hasn't seen clear signals that anyone's front-running the tariffs.
Hard to say, but there's good volume in the last weeks. We see that in ocean freight, we see that in air freight. The year has been quite volatile. We had very strong exports out of China for many weeks, on the ocean freight side especially, so strong growth there. But it has been volatile, so it's hard to call out whether there's really a strong element of that.
DHL CEO Tobias Meyer says he's seen diversification of supply chains in countries like Mexico.
And elsewhere in currency moves, John, the yen has breached 150 against the dollar following inflation data out of Japan. Tokyo consumer prices came in hotter than expected, leading to increased bets on further policy normalization. It's raised expectations that the Bank of Japan will raise rates in December, with the swaps market factoring in a 61% chance of a rate hike this month. And checking the yen right now, it is stronger against the dollar, 150.15.
Yeah, looking more broadly at markets, Nathan, Wall Street's macro traders, they're heading for their worst year since the pandemic. Let's get more on this from Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo.
Investor confidence in making big macro calls this year has dwindled as data surprises have whiplashed bets on central bank interest rate cuts. A too close to call US election and the shock unwind of a once popular yen-funded carry trade also rattled markets. As a result, some 250 firms, including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, are forecast to make 17% less this year from trading G10 rates and 9% less for currencies. That's according to analytics company Coalition Greenwich. The bright spot, currency trading, is expected to pick up in 2025 and 2026. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Tiwa, thank you. Bitcoin is headed back toward the 100,000 level as President-elect Trump embraces the broader crypto industry. Bolstering the upward trend is a group of about a dozen U.S. Bitcoin ETFs from issuers including BlackRock and Fidelity. They've attracted $6.2 billion so far in November. That's according to data compiled by Bloomberg. The previous peak earlier this year was $6 billion. And checking Bitcoin right now, it's up 1.4% at close to 96,500.
And turning back to the U.S. now and a look at big tech. The Federal Trade Commission announced it's opened an antitrust investigation of Microsoft, drilling into everything from the company's cloud computing and software licensing businesses to cybersecurity offerings and artificial intelligence products. Bloomberg antitrust reporter Josh Sisko says this is the first step in what's expected to be a pretty long process.
They've been working up to this for about a year, doing sort of informal information requests and interviews, and now this is the first time they've compelled Microsoft to turn over what will end up being a tremendous amount of information.
Bloomberg's Josh Sisko says the FTC's investigation could slow, and a second Trump administration was just promoting more deregulation.
And elsewhere in big tech, John, Australia has passed a law banning children under 16 from social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. The tech companies will be responsible for enforcing the ban and will face fines if they don't comply. Polling suggests Australian citizens back the move, but some argue it will not achieve the aim of protecting children from harmful content. Here's Australia's Green Party Senator Sarah Hanson-Young.
It doesn't actually make social media safer for young people. And that's the devastating thing about this, because we know that there are families who are struggling with this. We know there are young people who are struggling with their body image, their connection with their community, their peers, young people who are finding themselves addicted to these dangerous algorithms. But this bill doesn't do any of that.
Sarah Hanson-Young spoke there in the Australian Senate. Meta, X, and other social media platforms have also expressed strong opposition to this new law.
And let's go to geopolitics now. After the U.S. mediated a ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon earlier this week, there is hope for reaching a deal to free hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Israel's Channel 14 his government's doing many things, as he put it, to advance the freeing of the hostages. Netanyahu says the killing of Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, is opening an opportunity to reach an agreement.
And there are new developments as well, John, in the war in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin is warning his forces could strike decision-making centers in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, with new ballistic missiles as retaliation for attacks on Russia with Western missiles. Russia launched an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead and says it may fire it again in combat.
And finally, a look at Saudi-backed Live Golf, which is said to be weighing a possible merger with Europe's DP World Tour. If that's successful, it would cement Live Golf's position in the golfing calendar and give the DP World Tour, previously known as the DP European Tour, significant financial heft. The talks come as expectations of a deal between the Saudi Public Investment Fund and the PGA Tour, they edge closer. And that brings us to 5:08 on Wall Street. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini. Denise, good morning.
Good morning to you, John. Well, protesters clashed with police in the capital of Georgia in Eastern Europe. That's after the ruling party announced it was delaying talks with the European Union on the country's potential membership in the bloc for 4 years. Police used tear gas, pepper spray, physical force early this morning as a group of people rallied near the Parliament building there. 43 people detained there, dozens hurt, apparently, in that story. Notre Dame Cathedral in France unveiling its new interior 5 years after that devastating fire. Today, it's a watershed in the rebirth from its devastating fire in 2019. The occasion is French President Emmanuel Macron's final visit to the construction site to see the restored interiors for himself before all the proceedings today. A messy rollback of pandemic-era regulations in New York City. Many of those outdoor dining sheds we've been using, they were still standing as of last night and early this morning, John. Monica Jimenez is the night shift manager at Old John's Luncheonette on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
But for our business.
No plans to actually take this down?
No yet.
Yeah, and she says she's not removing them today. The deadline, though, is today. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Denise Pellegrini, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, thanks, Denise. And that brings us to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, being brought to you by Tri-State Audi. And for that, we bring in Bloomberg's Dan Schwartzman. Hello, Dan.
Good morning, John. The Lions got the NFL Thanksgiving tripleheader off and running by winning their 10th game in a row to improve to 11-1 on the season with a 23-20 win over the Bears, who have now dropped 6 games in a row. Chicago did have a chance to at least tie the game with time running out, but inexplicably let precious seconds run off the clock despite still having a timeout. Bears head coach Matt Eberflus, though, says he thought the team handled the clock properly at the end.
Yeah, I like what we did there. Again, once it's under 7, you're gonna call timeout there, or actually under 12, and then really you don't have an option, because it's 3rd to 4th, you got to throw it into the end zone then. So to me, it's I think we handled it the right way.
That's courtesy of ESPN.com. Giants are now losers of 7 straight after a 27-20 loss to the Cowboys in Dallas. Drew Lock got the start for the Giants as Tommy DeVito was ruled out with an injury. Elsewhere, Packers dominated the Dolphins 30-17 at Lambeau Field to improve to 9-3 on the season as Jordan Love threw for 2 touchdowns. Both the NBA and the NHL took the day off for Thanksgiving, but have full schedules today with the Knicks starting things off by visiting the Charlotte Hornets at noon. Elsewhere, the Brooklyn Nets are hosting the Orlando Magic. The Boston Celtics are in Chicago facing the Bulls, but the Lakers are hosting the Oklahoma City Thunder. Rangers, they're at the Flyers to start the busy day off in the NHL with the Islanders on the road at the Capitals, while the Bruins are home for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Other big matchups include Winnipeg visiting Vegas, Carolina home for the Florida Panthers, while the Dallas Stars are hosting Colorado. In tennis, 5-time Grand Slam winner, second-seeded Iga Swiatek accepted a 1-month suspension for testing positive for a banned substance. The former world's #1 failed the test back in August, but formally admitted the violation this week while accepting her penalty. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Dan Schwartzman, Nathan and John.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. As we head into a holiday-shortened day of trading on this Black Friday, investors might want to be getting as much of a jump on the holiday deals as everybody else. But we do still have a slew of economic data to digest before we get into the final trading month of 2024. And as we continue to assess what has been a remarkable bull run for stocks this year. Joining us now, Bloomberg News equities reporter Joe Easton. Joe, good morning. It really has been tough to derail the bull this year, has it not?
It has indeed, Nathan, and we are potentially looking to see some small gains continuing that theme in the US futures today. As you mentioned earlier, is a shortened trading there, but really the US is outshining Europe once again. I mean, European stocks lower on the day. But for now, we are actually seeing a little bit of a sentiment change. An interesting note out from Bank of America today saying that they are upgrading European stocks while they continue to like the US equity market. They reckon the conditions in terms of credit conditions here in Europe are actually getting a bit better. So kind of changing their view in terms of potentially shifting some more capital towards this region. But we really can't keep up with the gains that we've seen over in the US. Double-digit gains over there, of course, whereas in Europe we are just seeing small gains on a year-to-date basis.
Yeah, certainly a lot of the gains that we've seen this year have been driven by the AI trade, but then all this excitement, or at least initially, around the election of President-elect Donald Trump. Where does the trajectory seem to lie here?
Yeah, so I think the kind of most recent take is on Trump's appointments to his cabinet, of course, and potentially the latest reading is that they might not be as kind of hawkish in terms of some of their policies in terms of tariffs and that kind of issue there. So I think that's what the market's going to be holding on to. But obviously with that, there's an implication for the dollar and how that impacts the markets going forward. But in terms of Europe, we do need to see a bit of an easing in some of the rhetoric around tariffs. We did, of course, see that report earlier this week that we could be getting some harsh measures from the US, and that hit our market. I think the AI trade, I think, has maybe played a lot of its course out at the moment. So I'm not too upbeat on that element. I think a lot of it is going to come down to the White House, as you mentioned there.
Of course, we had that data cornucopia on Wednesday. What's the takeaway there, particularly around the personal consumption expenditures index that might be suggesting that that last mile around disinflation indeed can be the toughest?
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that. And actually, you don't want to keep flipping it back to Europe, but given I am here, we have actually just literally around 10, 15 minutes ago got in the euro area inflation, and it is kind of showing a similar thing. We're actually kind of struggling to come down from those levels. So inflation back above 2% in Europe, potentially not enough to derail the ECB from cutting their interest rates. That seems to be the take here. So we have actually seen some bond yields coming down and also the euro actually weakening very slightly. But I think it's a similar thing. As you say, it's very hard to get past that last bit of inflation. All these things tend to come on lagging effects. We all know that this will be hurting our bottom lines, our wallets for much longer in terms of the higher rates on mortgages and that kind of thing. So I think there's a little bit left to play on that trade at the moment.
And when it comes to the possibility of hawkish tariff talk from President-elect Trump, does that lead to kind of a butting of heads between what we could see on the policy front and what we could get from the Federal Reserve? Got about a minute left.
Yeah, no, I think that it's going to be two forces going pretty much the opposite direction. I mean, if the Fed wants to ease rates and then there is possible higher inflation coming from these tariffs, and tariffs are expected to be inflationary, of course, and therefore lifting the dollar, then it's very difficult for then the Fed to come in and start really easing their policy further if there's going to be upside to both the dollar and inflation more broadly. So therefore, it's kind of going against it. We'll have to see what Trump has to say more about the actual Fed himself. Obviously, when he was in power last time, he wasn't afraid to kind of throw about a bit of criticism on monetary policy. So we'll see what happens there. But as you say, it's kind of two really powerful forces pushing in the opposite direction. So it's going to be an interesting start to the year next year when we get there.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.